One of the most commonly asked questions in building an Excel model is, how do I create a drop-down list for a cell? Along those lines, there's a desire among Excel users to limit or lock down cells to restrict what a user can enter. Whether you have an interest in doing either of these to make your worksheet more user-friendly, or if you're doing it just because you want to make your worksheet more robust, data validation is a tool that we're going to use to restrict entry in cells and build drop-down lists. And this is a really interesting and fun tool to use, so I think we're going to have a good time. Let's go ahead and get started and see what we're going to build here. So you should be on the Data Validation tab. I'm going to zoom in a little. And by the end of this lesson, we're going to have built a drop-down list for location. It shows the locations that are available. A drop-down list for items with an input message that gives the user some clues as to what they should be putting in there. Then we have just a data validation rule that doesn't let us put in numbers that shouldn't be there. So like a negative number gives us an error back. And then finally, we have another validation rule on items sold that makes us put in a positive whole number as well. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead first of all and delete those rules off. Clear validation, data validation. I'm going to clear all the rules. Okay, so now we want to build a data validation for location. Well, the first thing we need to do is make a list of items that will be in location. And so typically I take that list and I put it on the same worksheet, but over to the right somewhere. You can also put them on another worksheet. That can be good too. So we're going to use some of the techniques we've used before to build our list of locations for this dropdown. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to copy location, Control-Shift down, copy everything with Control-C. Then I'm going to go over to AA and I'm going to just paste that list there. Now I've got a lot of values there, but I want just the unique values. So we're going to go up there and we're going to use remove duplicates to get it down to just the locations that we want to allow. Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens. This doesn't quite fit in the cell. It doesn't really matter, but we can just make it fit better so it looks nicer. All right, now let's go back. And while we're here, let's just go ahead and build our item list as well. So I'll copy that and then I'll go over to AC. Paste that and remove the duplicates. Okay, so now let's do this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and I'm going to build the data validation rules in row 130 because there's nothing there yet. So let's go ahead and add data validation. Now the first thing we're going to do is just stick on this settings tab, the first one. And here's where it's just asking us what the basics of the rule are. So we want to allow any value. That's the default. That's what it's doing right now. So we're not really checking. So what we want to do is click this drop down and we want to start with, we want to allow a list of items. Okay, and there's two check boxes here. The first one to ignore blanks. The second is what gives you the drop down. We want to leave that check, but that's what puts that drop down arrow on our cell. And so what's our source going to be? Well, that's just that list we built earlier. So we'll click that and we'll go over to our list and I'll just highlight the 3 items in our list and then click OK. So let's scroll down and see what we got there. There we go. A list of our items, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queens. Well, now let's build another list, okay? This time, why don't you see if you can build this on your own from what we just did. I'll let you pause the video now. Okay, well hopefully you got it done, but if not, let's go back up. We'll go to data validation again, and we want to allow values from a list. And we'll go back to our source. Now we're going to select this list source. I will say another approach here is you can give your list a named range and then the data validation will just pull from that list the same way. But for this, we're just going to do it this way. just selecting the items. And click OK. So let's look at this. We've got our list of items, but another thing we want to do is to give our user a clue or a hint that there's a way they can look at a drop-down. So let's go back to data validation and look at the second tab. So that second tab is the input message. And watch what we're going to do here. We're just going to go in here. I'm going to type items and put a semicolon, purely style. I just want to put a semicolon there. And now we're going to put a nice message. Please select an item from the drop-down list. Okay, and we'll click OK. So now, whenever somebody goes to that cell, look at that. They get a little helper text. It just says, items. Please select an item from the drop-down list. Okay, I know what to do now. I can just click that drop-down and pick one of the items. Now, what happens if you put something else? Because in these, you can typically type in other values. So if you type in a value that's not in the list, Excel comes back and gives you an error message. And it says it's not in the list, so we're not going to allow you to put that item in. Okay? There's a way to change that and make the message a little nicer. Again, we're going to go back to data validation. And this time, we're going to go to the error alert. So before, Excel was just kind of giving us a canned alert. But what we want to do here is we've got 3 different styles: stop, warning, and information. And we'll look at those. We'll start with stop, and we'll say items. And the error message is going to be, you must select an item from the drop-down. And click OK. Now, when I try to type something different in, I got my message that I typed in. It says, you must select an item from a drop-down. And it won't let us enter that. Okay, we'll hit cancel. Now, let me show you another little subtlety to that, though. If we go back to that, the stop will not let you violate the rule at all. If you get a warning or information, then it'll let you put that in. Okay, so we'll make that a warning. We get a different icon, and it's items, and then we'll say here, you entered an item that is not in the drop-down. Are you sure you want to add it? And click OK. So now if I go here and type apples, I get a warning. It says you entered an item that's not in the drop-down. Are you sure you want to add it? Now if I click yes, it's going to go ahead and let me enter that. But I gave the user an error message to tell them, hey, you entered something that wasn't approved. Are you sure you want to keep doing that? And we say no, it'll back that out. If I say yes, it lets you add it to that cell. So that's the difference in the error type of a stop and a warning. And then information just tells you something about the cell. Alrighty, so let's go back here and make it cookies. Let's just delete it all together. Well, now we're going to have 2 more rules, and then we're going to see how to make these apply to the entire table. Okay, so for cost per item, we don't want to drop down here, but we want to validate that they've entered a positive number. Okay, so I'm going to go to data validation again and go back to my first tab for settings. Now this time, instead of the list, we're going to let it be a decimal because the cost can be a decimal. And we'll put that in there. And now we can say, do we want it to be between 2 numbers? Do we want it to be between $5 and $10? We don't. We want this to be at least 0. So we're going to say greater than or equal to 0. And click OK. So now if I tried to type a negative number in, the data validation doesn't let me do it. And just like the others, I could make a nicer warning message or a nicer stop message there if I want to. But the point is, I'm not letting the user enter a negative value where we only need positive numbers. So I'll hit escape or click cancel. And that rule's in place. And now we want to make sure that people enter in whole numbers here. So right now, I can enter in a half. But for items sold, it's got to be whole numbers. So let's go to data validation. And now we're going to do whole numbers. And again, it's got to be, let's just say it's got to be greater than 0 this time. Because 0 doesn't make sense for an order number. Why are we even putting the line in there? So now if we put 5 in there, that's fine. How about 5.5? Nope. Excel's not letting us put in a number with a decimal. Whole numbers only. Let's try the 0. Go back and retry. Let's try the 0. That doesn't work either. It's got to be at least 1. And again, we can put that in our error messages. Okay, so that's about it for our rules definition. We've defined them all right here, but we don't have them anywhere else in the table. And they're not down any further, okay? Well, this is a really cool paste special feature. What I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight those 4 cells that I just put data validation on, and I'm going to do a copy, Control C. And then I'm going to highlight the rest of that table and go over to items sold, and I'm going to do a paste special. But watch this. When I right click, bring up my paste special, validation. There's a way I can only paste the data validation. So once you set up your rules, you can just paste them down the sheet, or you can put them in a table and it'll automatically propagate down. So we'll paste the validation, click OK. And now look at that. Every cell has those validation rules that we made up below. If I click on Whoopie Pies now, or if I click on an item now, I get my item help. If I go back here and try to adjust cost per item to make it something different, the validation rule doesn't let me do it. All right. Well, this lesson we learned about data validation. We learned how to set up a basic rule. We learned how to set up making that rule a drop-down list. And then we learned about putting an input message in our cells to give the user some direction and guidance. And we learned how to put friendly or warning message on when people do violate the data validation you put in the cell. I hope you really enjoyed this one. This is one of my favorite features in Excel. And go have fun with it, play with it, make some great forms, and let's get ready for the next lesson.